Hi everyone, welcome to this video back on my YouTube channel. You may have missed me. I have been AFK for a bit as I have just handed in my PhD. I'm not a doctor yet. I'll be a doctor in like a few months. I'll let you know when I'm a doctor. But we're back. I'm now free of the stress. I can't tell you how much of a relief it's been to finally be done with it. I'm back making videos. So weekly videos from now on. We're back at it. So to stage my return, I thought I'd talk about how to find your first bug and give you some strategies that you can apply like today to get you on that right track to finding your first bugs. These are my top tips. Actually, over my hiatus, I actually did some top tips with the XSS rat, and he actually suggested some completely other new tips that I'm not suggesting at all. So I'll leave that video in the description so you can go and check it out. But yeah, this week we're talking about strategies on how to find your first bug and how to go from like you might find your first bug to you will definitely be on that right track to finding it. We can never say this will get you a bug and this won't get you a bug, but I think these tips can really help. So we're back with our sponsor. This video is very kindly sponsored by Integrity. Integrity is a really fast growing bug bounty platforms. So bug bounty platforms, they're the places that have the targets, they allow you to report bugs, and they're the companies that manage things like payouts for you. And because they're growing so fast, there's so many opportunities. There's new programs coming out all the time. There's scope changes. There's always plenty of new and actually really fresh things that no one's actually had a chance to hack yet happening. So both with their public programs and their invite-only programs, I really love working with them because they're huge supporters of the bug bounty community. They don't just sponsor my content, they sponsor other creators, and I know a lot of people have already signed up, and some people even found their first bug, and I'm really pleased for you all. Or they participate in XSS challenges, and won some swag, and yeah, so happy for you all. If you want to sign up too, you can sign up with my link on screen or in the video description. That's go.integrity.com/Katie. In the video description on screen now, go.integrity.com/Katie. I don't get any cut, it just lets them know you came from my videos. So, I've tried and I can't find my first bug. I actually hear this a lot. And I will say, first of all, this is completely normal to struggle to find your first bug. Bug hunting is actually quite difficult. A lot of people make it sound, and I'm guilty of this as well, a lot easier than it actually is. But I think these are some good strategies that you can use that can improve your chances. And really what I want to do with this video is show you how to get started and focus on your finding bugs, not wasting time, and really making sure that when you're hacking, you're maximizing your potential to actually find a vulnerability. And with that, I think these are some good strats that we can use. So let's first talk about technical skills. Now, technical skills are obviously really important in security. But a lot of people kind of put this like perception on that you need to have like a ton of technical skills. Like you need to learn about recon, you need to learn all of these bug classes, and you got to be on top of 0 days and CVEs. And while it's really useful to expose yourself to a lot of these techniques that maybe won't find you your first bug, but are really good for like immersing yourself in InfoSec. And it's like learning a language, having that exposure to these concepts early on really helps. But you really don't have to know them. And I think recon especially is something that a lot of people struggle with to really learn and really understand well. But then they get to a position where actually they didn't even need recon to find their first bug. And so I think the bare bones technical skills you need is how to find burp, an idea of the bugs you can find, and an idea of how the internet works. You really don't have to be an expert. There's never going to be a critical mass of knowledge that you will obtain, and then that is it. You can now find your first bug. It just won't happen. And this also includes things like learning platforms. Now, learning platforms are really useful. And they can be great motivators, especially if it's financial, because you feel like, well, I paid for this, I've got to make the most out of it. But even then, they're not going to get you to that critical mass of knowledge because you probably already have it. If you're watching my videos, you've probably seen, all about how to find your first bug. You've probably seen my videos on burp. You really don't need to be an expert, you just have to learn the basics. And actually next week, I'm going to be talking about how I found my first bug and how I did it without knowing burp at all. And with the kind of idea of what bugs you can find, what are you kind of looking for? So my recommendation is not to go from program to program looking for one bug. It just won't help you. It really helps to be able to dive deep into a target to really understand how it works. And if you go, okay, I'm going to try XSS everywhere until I find one, you might actually just be completely ignoring vulnerabilities in plain sight. So what I'm going to suggest, and I think you should do this when you write notes, is you focus on the signs of bugs. If you see an ID, you should instantly be thinking IDOR. And if you're not really sure how to exploit an IDOR, you can look that up when you find one of those bugs, right? Let's focus first on trying to develop that sense of narrowing down your leads, right? You're a detective. And what you want to do is look at every lead you have and see which one is most likely to be a bug. If you see kind of e-commerce or any kind of complex logic, really, you should be thinking business logic. Any kind of reflected output, any input fields, if you've got a profile where you fill out a bunch of details, it shows it on the next screen, absolutely you should be thinking cross-site scripting. An open scope, a large API, even a mobile application, you should be thinking about information disclosure, and that's where skills like recon come in. So what you might see is kind of really large open scope, and then you go, okay, how do I develop that recon knowledge? You shouldn't be kind of being in a position where you're like, okay, I'm just going to do recon in every single program until I find something, because you probably won't find anything. And again, you've got mobile apps, especially things like client-side validation only, great for cross-site scripting, especially if you can escalate it. And that's going to be a video coming out really soon that I'm going to do with Codingo, so spoilers. But you should be thinking cross-site scripting, SQL injection are all the bugs you want to look for. And this is what I think you should focus in on your notes as well. When you make notes on what you're watching, what you're reading, what you're absorbing, you should always keep in mind the kind of what was the sign of that, what led them to that conclusion, because that's really, really important. And this isn't an exhaustive list. Again, as you learn, as you read, as you watch, as you listen, as you immerse yourself, you should be answering these questions. What was the sign? How did they exploit it? Where can I find more information when I need it? What you should be kind of developing with your notes is almost like a knowledge base, right? What you should be doing is this kind of, this is a cross-site scripting, and I've tried these payloads and it didn't work. Okay, what resources do I have to bypass this? Or I've looked at SQL injection and it didn't work. What are the bypasses, for example? And you should really only focus on going in depth when you need to, and your notes should reflect that you should be skimming over quite a lot of resources, but just making note of that kind of, what was the sign? How did they exploit it? Where can I find more information? And that should be the 3 key questions you answer every single time you watch something. With that in mind, how do you develop these signs, right? Because they're not necessarily very clear. Well, one really useful thing you can do is learn how the internet works. Now, understanding how the internet works, both in like a request and a response and what TCP is, but especially how modern web applications are built, are extremely important pieces of knowledge. Because what you'll see is a lot of these words, frameworks, PHP, Python, Django, JavaScript, you'll see NoSQL, MySQL, Docker, AWS, containers, cloud. How does these distinct concepts go towards your first bug? And one way I think is really great for learning this is learning how to make web applications. It's a really straightforward way that can actually be kind of fun to help you increase your chances really and try and understand how the web works. And when you learn programming, it doesn't necessarily matter what language you pick, because quite a lot of programming is learning what's called computational thinking, which is solving problems that can be written in code, right? Creating algorithms. And if you can get really good at that algorithmic thinking, that kind of computational thinking, you'll be able to apply whatever tool or whatever problem you want to solve in a completely different language than one you're familiar with. And you'll never have that position when you're like, oh, I don't know that language. But it's developing that core skill, which is really useful in bug bounty hunting as well. It's very similar. One thing I always say when I look at code or a web page and I'm hacking it, I can see how the code was built because I have so much knowledge of how the web works from being a developer for so long. And I can kind of see through the styling and kind of think about what the underlying technology and techniques might be. And that was really helpful to finding my first bug. And with that, I say programming is really helpful for creating your own tools and understanding tools, but you should never rely on tools. Tools like FFUS, AMAS, Nucleus especially are really, really good tools. They're excellent tools for the community, but don't rely on them. Bug hunting often takes a large amount of manual testing. If you're using these tools, so is everybody else. And you're just going to find the same bugs as everybody else, which means you're going to get duplicates. So what I would really recommend is, yes, absolutely use those tools, but really understand why you need to use them and how they kind of fit into your methodology, not somebody else's, which means instead of just learning them because you think they'll make you find a bug, you're really being that kind of more thoughtful about how you might be using them, and that's really important to get the most out of it. My next kind of piece of advice is to focus on interactive websites. Interactive websites are much easier to hack as a beginner than static websites. Although you find some of the same vulnerabilities, such as information disclosure on static websites, having a dynamic interactive website with input is so much easier. A blog is really hard to hack because often as kind of like someone looking at the blog, unless it has a ton of plugins, what you see is like an admin panel, and it's like, well, how do I bypass that admin panel? And absolutely there are ways, but as a beginner, you are very unlikely to find a 0-day. And actually, instead, it's better to focus your efforts on something like e-commerce, where you have a lot of that interactivity. You can add stuff to the cart, remove stuff to the cart, payment, checkout, create profile. There's so many like social media websites that are on like HackerOne or BugCrowd or Integrity that you can totally look and find a different target. And with that in mind, I'm going to tell you to think features. So don't think about the kind of underlying technology and don't worry so much about what cross-site scripting is or anything like that. Look at what's in front of you. When you attack a website as a beginner, you should be thinking about the features it has. Instead of thinking, what about the underlying code? What about the WAF? What about this? What about that? Look at what's in front of you. If you can see a registration, test that. If you're buying a product, like testing the purchasing of a product, put it in your cart. Perform those business logic interactions because those are where bugs are going to be that you can find as a beginner. You're not necessarily testing the different endpoints and kind of having that deep knowledge. That comes in time, but really looking at it and going, these are the features I can see in front of me, and this is what I'm looking at is so, so important. And with that, I'm going to recommend you play to your strengths. And when you first start out, you definitely don't know what your strengths are. 100% you don't know what your strengths are. But consider what you might already know. So I know a lot of people come in as their students. Maybe they study computer science. So maybe you have already know some programming, right? Maybe you know like JavaScript. Or maybe you've just done a bunch of cross-site scripting CTFs. So that might be a good thing to focus on then looking at cross-site scripting or looking at web applications that are likely to have it. If you've got a programming background, something like a code review might be super helpful. Something you can deploy locally and actually kind of mess around with the code as it's running and stuff like that. And if you're not sure what your strengths are, you can learn one. Like, it's totally possible to just go and say, I want to learn how mobile applications work. So that's what I'm going to focus on and become a really good mobile applications hacker. And this kind of plays into what I said right at the very start, but I'm going to say it right at the very end as well, because I think it's one of the most important pieces of advice I can give you, which is don't switch programs constantly. One of the biggest mistakes, like new hunters make, is to say, this is too hard, I need an easy program. But going deep and understanding underlying functionality can be key to finding bugs. And it can be key for doing things like teaching you a lot. If you're constantly having to switch programs, you're going to be in this stage constantly of having to learn how something works and not focusing on hacking. And again, if you want to kind of think about it in a kind of broader sense, you're missing that. You've got that point where you're kind of looking at the features, but you're not actually testing the features. So, okay, those were 10 tips, but let's talk through it. Let's talk what my kind of stages are. How would I, talking to you right now, suggest you go and find your first bug? So my first piece of advice is choose the right program for you. Now, it can be really hard to understand what makes something a good program and a bad program, which is why I made an entire video going through it. Now, I really recommend this video. It's one of my older videos. I'm sorry, the audio quality is probably not that great, but I think it goes through kind of really well things like program statistics and how to understand them and how to actually make that cool as a beginner, how to tell if a program is like new and fresh or if it's maybe been hacked on a little bit, and what the advantages and disadvantages of hacking on either is. There's probably no wrong program, but I will say there is absolutely wrong assets. So once you pick the program, on HackerOne or BugCrowd, Integrity, whatever, you then have an asset to pick from. So this is a program on Integrity, and we can see here we've got like a list of these tiers of assets here. Oh god, there we go. So we've got these kind of tiers for bounties, and then we've also got the kind of URLs which are in tiers. Now what we want here is interactive assets. Now sometimes this might need some recon, but actually we can just visit all these URLs and just check how interactive they are. You know, it says here this is a shoe retailer in Belgium, which should be instantly giving us thumbs up, because e-commerce websites are great places to start because they have a lot of interactivity. You know, if we're saying things like putting in our address, we might think cross-site scripting. If we're talking about, I don't know, paying for something, we might be thinking business logic, and all that kind of things. So focus on finding those interactive assets. Some of them will be static, some of them won't be. Try not to worry too much about things like in this example where we have different tiers of bounties. They're quite common to be like what they want researchers to focus on. There might be more people hacking for higher bounties, or you might just find it's the same. It can really vary. And so then we want to focus on features. So if we're looking at Integrity here and we're like, okay, focus on features, what do we see in front of us? Well, we see my username, InsiderPhD. So we know there's a profile. We can see all of these programs here. We can see favoriting a program, hiding a program. We can see searching. We can see my submissions. And if we think about what the functionality is, you know, liking something and unliking something, that might be a great place for an idle, right? Could we do that from somebody else's account? If we're thinking about the profile, that's a great place for cross-site scripting. If we're thinking about things like, you know, invites, again, can we generate loads of invites? Is that a business logic error? So have that kind of focus on features first and then bugs second. And when you write your notes and you kind of do your notes in whatever format you want. By the way, on my Twitter right now, there is a note-taking Thunderdome where people are voting on their best note at taking application. So if you want to participate. And yeah, so if you make some notes here on what you're trying to look for, what you should see is you should make sure it's very clear, you know, how did they find it? What were the details of the vulnerability? What was the impact? But especially focusing on making sure that how did they find it? What were the signposts for them? That will be so useful when it comes to actually hunting yourself, because then you'll be thinking the same thing. You'll be thinking, oh, I saw somebody do something similar. Can I try what they did? And that's really, really important. Perhaps the most important thing your notes can provide. So always you want to confirm a vulnerability with manual testing. Now, tools are great, but we have to manually test. We have to make sure that we can confirm and also explain the results. And what is the main point of having a bug bounty hunter if it's not to find bugs that can be manually found? Like, because they can run scanners themselves, right? Scanner isn't going to find you your first bug, but like understanding the vulnerability, being able to produce the vulnerability, that's what gets you paid out. And we have finally figuring out impact and writing the report. So one of the best ways to get yourself a higher bounty is to really scare a bug bounty platform's customers. You want them to be shivering in their boots and really, really glad that they found it, you found it before anybody else used it. Like, you really want to scare them. So when you write a report, put it in their terms, like, connect it up to how their business works. connect it up to what their priorities are. And that's really a good tip. That can even get like a medium bug, can be triaged as a high if you can fully explain that impact. So those are my top tips. I hope those were useful to you, and I hope that you can then take this and find your first bug. I really want to thank my patrons over on Patreon. And all of them. Usually I only do it for my top tier supporters, but this week I want to do it for everybody, because they have been supporting me even though I haven't been making content, and I've got a really interesting like future stuff coming up. So if you want to also join them and be a patron of my work, I'd really appreciate that. Some of the new stuff is that they'll have access to things like bug hunting resources for anybody else to get access to my notes. They get slides, they get videos before they come out. By the way, did you know I'm recording this video at the same time I'm recording 2 others? So Patreons will actually get this video and 3 others literally the day after I record them, while if you are just a regular YouTuber, you just get it when they come out on Wednesdays. So with that in mind, I want to thank all of my patrons: Forrest Held, El Houssine, Boo Graham, Josh, Calogario, Brett Haynes, Jackson N, Zero Byte, Andreas Lucio, the OWASP DevSlop team, love you guys, Chindand, I'm going to go with Chindand, Wardell Castles, Lan, Gynvael, James Clee, Shirley Singleton, Joshua Moore, Zander Mackey, Kunakusi. I'm very sorry if I butchered your name. But thank you very much to all of my patrons who have all been supporting me throughout my time off over on Patreon. I really appreciate it. And thank you again to our amazing sponsor, Integrity. I really don't take having an advertiser lightly, and I really do genuinely think they do amazing things for the community. And the sponsorship has really allowed me to make some serious investments into my channel. So things like improving the audio, improving the editing, being able to produce visualizations more easily. All this has been thanks to the support of Integrity, and it's been amazing to work with them. I really actually like how much they do for the community as well. So one of the things I really like is that they're really active on social media. So they reply to hackers, they engage with their community, and they like give away swag all the time, and it's amazing. So really do please give them a lot of love from my channel. You can sign up with my link on screen in the video description. It's go.integrity.com/Katie. Really, really pleased to have them on board. And they are just the most fantastic team. And with that is the end of the video. I hope you've enjoyed this after my kind of brief break. I'm really sorry I had to take a bit of hiatus and a step back, but I'm back. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to carry on making weekly videos. Back on it. Next week I'm going to be telling you how I found my first bug and talking about how to find business logic errors in applications. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all next week. Have a great week, everybody. I will see you all later. Bye, everyone.